So I am Devin Quinn. I am our outreach manager. So I just kind of plan webinars, hear from the community, see what they want, and this was something that was very highly asked for, so we made it happen. Um, we have Dr. Carp speaking tonight about what's beyond your plate. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. We have Rob and Mallory who are behind the scenes. You can't see or hear them, but they're in the chat with you. They'll be sure to interrupt if there is questions that need to be answered, but they're going to do their best to answer if they can. So yeah, I guess we'll get started and then.
Great. And how do I
in there.
advance the slides? You said there's a button somewhere.
Oh, I have to give you the
Okay.
control.
Oh, I see. I just
Now
use
you
the
should hear.
arrows. Okay. Very good.
Sorry.
All right. Well, hello everyone from all those interesting places. As you know, my name is Dr. Jonathan Carp. I am a dermatologist in South Florida. My practice is in Delray Beach. And I come from a family of doctors. My father was a doctor. He was an old-fashioned family doctor. He took me on trips, house calls. He was one of the last generation of doctors who did house calls, and I used to be I was his son who would carry at the age of 6 or 7 his black doctor's bag up to farmhouses to see patients who were sick. Sometimes it was the grandmother. And what he taught me was to see the person as a unit, as a whole, and to understand that there are so many different factors that take into account your health. And he taught me how to listen to my patients. And there's a famous doctor by the name of Dr. Sir William Osler. He's considered the founder of modern medicine. And he always, one of his famous quotes was, "Listen to the patient. They're trying to tell you what is wrong with them." And my father taught me that no one can know you better than yourself. And that's an important thing for all of us, because we, at one point or another, are going to be patients. And unfortunately, modern medicine, in a lot of ways, has depersonalized the connection between the doctor and the patient. And some doctors feel as though they know you better than you know yourself. And it doesn't mean that you don't need doctors, but my goal with my patients is for my own patients to become their own authority in health, for them to be able to make the final decisions for themselves after learning as much as they can about whatever condition they may have, but also seeing the condition behind the disease, understanding how it affects all of your body. And of course, I got into dermatology, which is the study of skin, hair, and nails. And one of the things that was really interesting to me about the skin was how it was an external reflection of what was happening on the inside. And as a result of that, I really got very interested in how diet and lifestyle play a role in your overall health. And in 2004, I had a patient by the name of Karen, and she had really bad lupus erythematosus. Lupus, it's an autoimmune disease, and we couldn't do anything for her. We had her on so many medications. It really worried me when I would drive home from work, because I had her on organ transplant medications, and nothing was working. And she disappeared for a while. We stopped the medicines, nothing was working. And she came back 4 months later, and through diet and lifestyle, she basically cured herself of lupus. And that was one of the most amazing things that I had seen in my practice up until that point. And at that point, even though I had a strong interest in diet and lifestyle and looking at patients as a whole, not just their skin, I really got into the understanding of how internal conditions affect the skin, and understanding how the entire body is interconnected in so many ways. And celiac disease is one of those conditions that can affect so many different aspects of the body. And having a clear understanding of that really, in a lot of ways, when you have a better understanding of that, it actually gives you more, in my experience with the patients that I've worked with, when they truly understand how it's affecting different parts of the body. In a lot of ways, it's very empowering and even motivating, because once you understand how things downstream can improve in so many dramatic ways, things change. The way you look at the condition changes, and the optimism behind what you can do about this becomes a lot stronger. And in my case, that's really my goal for tonight, but also for my interactions with patients, because as I said, you know your body better than anyone else. No one knows you. You inhabit yourself. No doctor can tell you anything otherwise. And with celiac disease, unfortunately, as many of you know, and sometimes I may say statements that might seem very, very simple, but so don't think that I'm patronizing or anything like that. I'm just stating it because I don't know exactly how much every person in the audience knows. So I'll be speaking as if I'm talking to someone who knows very little about celiac disease. But at the end of this lecture, I'm hoping you can see how the skin and the gut and everything else sort of is playing together. And I'll be using various analogies. So I hope those analogies will help you to remember and to understand things a little bit better. So let's proceed as we go into the. And I might add, I'm also very much involved in gluten-free in the gluten-free world, because in addition to practice of medicine, I have a company called Miracle Noodle, which I started many years ago. And Miracle Noodle, which is a company that sells low-calorie, low-carb, gluten-free noodles that are made from both konjac plant and also egg white noodles. They're also gluten. Our company, which is evolving into what's called Miracle Living, is always gluten-free. We'll always be a gluten-free company. And I will just say, a couple years ago, I spoke at the Gluten Intolerance Group. I think it was their 25th or 50th. I can't remember which year it was. And I have to tell you, of course, I studied celiac disease in medical school and had an interest in it. But I learned so much listening to the other lectures of the other doctors. And more importantly, I learned so much from the families, because it's really hard for a doctor to truly understand the challenges that celiac families have to go through until you sit down and you have enough time. This was over a weekend to really interact, and I got so many amazing stories and so much motivation to really become even more involved in this community, and to hopefully be able to contribute in a unique way to education from the skin perspective. But we'll be covering a whole host of things. So I look at this as sort of the blueprint of what's happening here. Because celiac, as you know, as many of you know, some of you might not, doesn't just live in the intestine. And in the public, a lot of people think celiac is, like a wheat allergy. But what we need to understand is that this is an autoimmune disease. And I like to explain an autoimmune disease like your body is like a company. And the company there is a security. And the security sees an intruder. It might not know it's a real intruder. And that's essentially gluten. And what happens is that security ends up attacking the plant floor of the company. And that causes all kinds of problems for the rest of the company. That's sort of what I like to describe an autoimmune disease as. The security team is attacking something that it's not supposed to be attacking. And there are what I call downstream effects, meaning in this particular case, because it's affecting the intestinal lining, there's a whole host of things that can happen, and those can be in the nervous system, because essentially what's happening is the gut lining is being attacked, and that is allowing things to get into the bloodstream in a way that is can affect other parts of the body. And there can be a amount of inflammation that actually can cause the nervous system to react with fatigue and mood. There can, of course, be digestive distress. There can be asymptomatic damage. There can be a whole host of problems, but a lot of people are often asymptomatic And of course, there are probably many people here who had symptoms or that were undiagnosed for many years. And so you can have the starting of damage early on, and this is one of those things that can affect various different can present in various different ways. Now, the skin is an immune organ, and what it has in common with the gut is very interesting. It is a lined surface that is trying to prevent things from getting into the body. Your skin is preventing the outside from getting in. And the intestine is also, we consider it in medicine, connected to the outside. In other words, it's the tube that goes, of course, it's inside your body, but it's actually reacting to the outside because you're putting things from the outside in. And so we consider the skin and the intestine to be very similar in that regard. It's acting as a fortress, and it's selectively allowing things to come in. And this is an important aspect of what it is. And because it's a barrier, because it's your defense, your immune system needs to be active. And that's why we think about the intestine as an immune organ, because there is so much needed. There's so much needed. Your immune system needs to build around the intestine to be on monitor. Remember, we're speaking about that security force. Needs to be ready to act if something gets past that barrier. And when the immune system is overreacting to something that is it's not supposed to react to, then the fortress exterior of the gut starts to weaken, and then a whole host of other problems can happen. But the skin is actually doing the same thing. The skin is constantly talking to the immune system, it's talking to the nervous system, it's talking to the environment. And it's one of the first places that you can actually have a reaction to something going on the inside. Because when there is like a low-grade fire going on the inside, the skin is often one of the first places that you can see. This is one of the most interesting things about dermatology to me that really got me involved, was you could make so many connections to things that were going on in the body by the pattern of what was happening on the skin. And essentially, any kind of accidental exposure or immune dysregulation can trigger any sort of response here. And this is one of those things to understand, that not only is your skin, it's easy to understand the skin as a fortress, because it's our fortress against the outside world. But we should also think of the gut lining as a fortress. And whereas the skin is quite thick, believe it or not, the fortress of the gut is really only about 1 cell thick. And so the fortress really needs to be almost perfect. And when there is an autoimmune phenomenon happening like with celiac disease, unfortunately that fortress is not going to be able to withstand what it's supposed to do. One of the conditions that is most associated with celiac disease is something called dermatitis herpetiformis, and it's quite a rare condition. I've been in practice for 26 years, and I see maybe one patient every year, every other year with dermatitis herpetiformis. And in this case, obviously the overwhelming majority of people have gluten sensitivity. It's controlled by medicine, but it also goes away when someone's on a gluten-free diet. And in many cases, for these people who have celiac disease, dermatitis herpetiformis is their indicator. It's their flag, so to speak, of, okay, I got exposed to gluten and the dermatitis herpetiformis comes out. And this is really intensely itchy. It's often on the elbows or the joints, the knees, sometimes on the scalp, and they're very, very, very itchy. And sometimes you don't see the blisters, so And even in this particular case, sometimes it takes some time to actually make this diagnosis. And that is another one of those things that can delay the diagnosis. And as if there is a long delay in the diagnosis, unfortunately, over time, the gut lining gets continually damaged. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means, but there's a whole host of absorption of things like zinc and iron that are not properly being absorbed because of what's happening in the gut lining, which results in some skin conditions. So eczema and atopic dermatitis is not directly related, but what can happen is when there is an impaired barrier in the gut, that can lead to issues, inflammation in the non-specific inflammation in the skin that can also lead to some barrier problems, that fortress that we spoke about, happening in the skin. And what we've discovered as medicine has progressed, especially just since I've started practice, because I've gotten into diet and lifestyle, what I call lifestyle medicine, as an example, that patient that I spoke to you about, lupus, is that a lot of autoimmune diseases have gut issues. In fact, there is a test that I get for patients. It's called the gut zoomer, and it's a test for the gut. And one of the things it tests for is the microbiome, but it also tests whether there is increased gut permeability, which basically means that the fortress is letting things through. And when that happens, the immune system can get a little bit hypercharged to a point where that security guard of the company starts attacking a part of the company, as I said, that it's not supposed to attack. And so anytime I've had an autoimmune disease, any autoimmune disease, and I've checked that test, without fail, there's always some gut issues. Another thing that we sometimes see with celiac disease is alopecia areata. This is a condition where people can get circles of hair loss throughout their scalp. It's mostly very treatable and often can go away when things improve with the celiac disease. And it's also associated with things like iron, zinc, and vitamin D. And the reason is because of the thing that I just spoke about, which is basically that because the gut lining is not doing what it's supposed to, it's not capable of absorbing some of the nutrients that you would need. And there's also other things that can happen, things like just generalized itching. This can also happen, and sometimes people will present just with non-specific itching. And they come in, sure, not at all.
Dr. Kirk, we have a question. Sorry to interrupt. We have a question really quick. There's two. One that I wanted to touch on. There was a woman who mentioned that she grew up always having, sorry, it popped up, digestive problems, including bloating and anemia. She was not diagnosed with celiac until 2011. With that said, she assumes that growing up she was gluten intolerant. Do you think that's because nothing was done
that she has
until later
issues
in her
with
life?
bloating and anemia? I guess so.
I believe
Okay,
that
well,
I guess her celiac
when the
diagnosis was
diagnosis
so much
is
later.
very late, when you look at the
So,
intestine in cross section, you have all these folds, and the folds actually increase the surface area of the skin of the gut, which allows for more absorption of nutrients. Now, what happens is that those ridges start to flatten out, which means there's not a same amount of surface area to be able to absorb those nutrients, which can relate to other things. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's sort of what can happen when there's a delay. But those ridges do come back, and your gut can heal significantly to a point where you can absorb those nutrients. Now, if I see somebody who has bloating, there could be some microbiome issues going on, and additionally some absorption issues. So a further analysis usually is done similar to like what I described, which is getting a test like the where that looks at the microbiome to see if there's what's called dysbiosis. Maybe the microbiome in your scenario, you know, is disordered, and there are things you can do about that. There's some very good books on the market. There's one that I like in particular called Gut Check, which is also a gluten-free diet that is recommended in there. There are a lot of resources for that, and it's hard to say honestly what the condition of your gut is right now. That's why you know, biopsy is one of those things that is done in celiac diseases to, one, to make the diagnosis, but two, to see, you know, what's going on with those sort of natural ridges, to see if they've flattened out. So I hope that was somewhat of an answer. So.
Yeah. All right. So the other question that I see in here is, what is the name of the
Well,
gut
the gut
test,
test
and what
is
type of
the one I
sample is
use is called the
collected?
Gut Zoomer test. It's run by a lab called the Vibrant Health. It's doctor ordered, and unfortunately, it's not covered by insurance, and it's expensive. I think sometimes it's $4.99. It's very, very expensive. What I would recommend is, if you can't afford that, is to really start studying about gut health, and it starts with you know, the gut microbiome, understanding that. Um, as I said, I mentioned one book called Gut Check, which is quite good. Um, but there's a lot of resources now about that. And in a lot of ways, you know, gluten in and of itself can be irritating, even if it's not causing a you know, an autoimmune reaction. And therefore, in a lot of ways, this is an opportunity to craft an incredibly healthy diet, because people who eat a lot of grains as a large portion of their diet, that's really not a healthy diet in a lot of ways. And we'll probably get into a little bit about that in just a moment. But also, mouth and nails, because of this malabsorption scenario, can lead to rashes around the mouth, brittle nails. And again, all of these sorts of malabsorption problems over time with with strict gluten avoidance, you can get back to a point where you are not malabsorbing, not having trouble absorbing these nutrients. So another way of looking at it is the shield. We talked about the fortress analogy. Now we're talking about sort of the shield, very, very similar. And what about handling something that has gluten in it? Gluten proteins are basically too large to penetrate the skin. Now, there are various opinions on whether inflamed skin, where the barrier is not doing anything, is not acting the way it's supposed to, is a different scenario. There are case histories in Japan that are more related to wheat allergies from topical medicines that have wheat proteins in them. I'm not saying you know, the gluten's not passing into your body and causing a gluten reaction, but because there's wheat there, I mean, it's probably a good idea to avoid, but it's unlikely to have an issue. Now, one thing is that we know in dermatology, and we see often, is that when you put something on, it ends up on your face, because you put it on and you may touch your mouth, you may touch your eyes. In fact, I'll just give you an unusual scenario, and that is that when people develop rashes around the eyes, you would think, well, the most common cause would be something that they're putting around their eyes. The actual one of the most common causes of that is from nail polish. Now, you're not reacting you're not reacting here, but because the skin is different, but you're reacting around the eyes. Well, the same thing is that you may not react here, but you might be touching your mouth, and you might have the lotion on your hands. So you do have to be cautious in that scenario. So that's sort of how I advise people. But if you were to touch a piece of bread, as an example, you know, and you washed your hands afterwards to make sure that you didn't touch your face, then generally it's not going to be a problem. Now, of course, high risk are going to be problems with lip products, balms and lipsticks and lip gloss. There are lots of resources online for gluten sensitive patients, and they're actually, you probably know the resources even better than I do, for people who have been in the community for long enough. But the truth is that anything that gets closer to the mouth can potentially be a problem. I spoke about the hand-to-mouth transfer, which is definitely a higher risk in children, but it's pretty high in adults as well, because we don't really have a clear understanding of how much back and forth there is between our hands. And then finally, breathing in is again another way that you can have an environmental risk, whether that is flour in the air or something like that can also potentially be an issue. So we're talking then really about these hidden exposures. We spoke about airborne risks. Oats are an interesting scenario, which I actually learned mostly about at the Gluten Intolerance Group meeting a couple years ago, and that is that the Gluten Intolerance Group's really fabulous about educating people about oats, and their standards are really incredibly high, to make sure there's not cross reaction, that there's not cross-contamination, I should say, between. It's just
No,
the
I'm not
way
sure if
the
his
the
internet went
processing
out. He
of.
was a little bit spotty on my side too. Oh, there he
Hear me?
is. Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened there, but I'm glad I was able to reconnect again. So if it's certified gluten-free, but with the gluten intolerance group, I think you can be quite safe. The scenario there is that there can be a small amount in the fields that's growing like amongst the oats that can have gluten in it. And there is some potential cross reactivity, but I think if you follow the standard recommendations of the gluten intolerance group, you're going to be fine. Sneaky ingredients, again, these are probably things that many of you already know, but you really need to make sure things are certified gluten free, because they're because it's important, obviously, because again, not everyone is symptomatic in the same way, and we want to make sure that even though maybe you might not have a gut flare, if you're getting gluten, we're talking about that again, the folding of the gut. We need to make sure that there's no inflammation there because of its wide-ranging effects. And then, of course, shared surfaces, cutting boards, toasters, of course, and that sort of thing. So there are so many resources now. I remember when I was in medical school, we had and this is back in the 90s. We had a day where we had some patients with celiac disease, and they talked about how difficult it was for them. There were no resources back then. I mean, really no resources. It was really, really awful. And now with the internet, this was before the internet, there are so many resources. And again, Gluten Intolerance Group is such a great resource in and of itself. I think you need to advance the slides because I'm not connected to that part of it anymore, I don't think. Okay, all right. Okay, so another analogy is sort of the overflowing cup, which is what I like to say is that in a lot of ways, the dose, as I mentioned on the last slide, is matters far less than what people think, because essentially it's not about the size of the crumb. It's sort of already pushing an already hyper-primed immune system past its turning point. In other words, it's hard to say where you are on the inflammation spectrum because so many people have various degrees of inflammation and symptomatology. Just because you're not necessarily having any symptoms, again, doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't some sort of malabsorption and some sort of inflammation going on. So it's something that I like to discuss. And gluten and supplements, medications, the fillers, the binders, the chewables, gummies, all these can potentially hide gluten. And patients frequently forget to sort of think about these. And then one of the most favorite things that I like to talk about is gluten-free junk food. Now, the problem with a lot of gluten-free products is that they're just not good for you. Um, an excessive amount of rice flour, as an example, can spike your blood sugar in ways that are just really not healthy for you. Sometimes the fats they put into some of these baked items are really, really not good for you, which is going to cause other problems. And and I like to reframe the whole scenario here in the sense that this is an opportunity, one that I wouldn't wish on anybody, but there is a way of crafting a diet that is just so remarkably healthy that you have the potential, unfortunately, because you have to, but of constructing a diet that is significantly healthier than the rest of the population by avoiding gluten containing grains. Because again, people who are eating large quantities of gluten-free grains, they're not the healthiest people. In fact, they're quite unhealthy. And so when you choose gluten-free products, you should make sure that they're healthy for you, that they're not loaded with hyper assimilatable starches that make your blood sugar spike. The last thing we need is excess weight and problems with your blood sugar. Those are going to age you faster and lead to other conditions that are a problem. And moderation, unfortunately, is defined by people. I do, as I said, a lot of lifestyle medicine. When you ask people to define moderation, unfortunately, the definitions that the average person gives is excessive. And so learning what moderation is, and for eating a couple gluten-free cookies, I know it might sound like moderation, and now you're really going to hate me when I say this, but saying that you're having several cookies on the weekend, that are made from a likely rancid fat that they add, whether it's some sort of hydrogenated fat or even some other vegetable fat of some sort that is no good for you, in addition to all the starches, that's not a weekly thing. That's probably a monthly treat. And again, you're probably now really, really angry at me, but there are lots of products that are gluten-free and they're healthy. But that's why I'm really an advocate of learning how to really construct just an incredibly healthy diet. And you do that through learning about the gut, just the gut in general, not just the effect of gluten happening in the gut, but how to rebuild the gut after you've been off of gluten, and that your gut is healing. The last thing you need to do is to have a messed up microbiome on top of it. And a lot of the American population has disordered gut because we're eating all kinds of things that are causing irritation in the gut. And so obviously, of course, I started a company that sells gluten-free foods that are incredibly healthy, that aren't going to spike your blood sugar, that are going to give you high quality protein, that aren't loaded with artificial sweeteners, all these sorts of things. There are other companies like mine as well. But of course, I'm a lifestyle medicine doctor and dermatologist, so this is front of mind for me. But when I'm talking to a celiac patient, again, I spend almost more time talking about the aspects of how to create a really robust and healthy gut after you have avoided gluten, because at the risk of just repeating myself again, you have the opportunity here to construct a really, really healthy diet. And again, okay, you can have cookies every once in a while, but learning what moderation is also really, really important. So what happens with these nutritional deficiencies? As I said, there can be a blunting of these ridges. I remember in medical school they used to say, I think the analogy was if you opened up a small intestine and you laid it out, it would like fill a half a tennis court or something like that because of all these ridges. And that allows you to absorb, there's so much area that you can absorb as much of the nutrients as possible. And what happens with with celiac is, again, those ridges are no longer there. And so if you were to using that analogy, open up the intestine, it would only take up a much smaller space. And so the gut wall doesn't have the same time of exposure to the food to be able to absorb the iron, to absorb the zinc and the vitamin D and the B12 and the folate and even essential fatty acids. And therefore, when that happens, with iron as an example, as well as zinc, that can cause problems with hair loss and poor wound healing. It can lead to problems, just general problems in your immune system. When you're not absorbing fatty acids enough, you are essentially prone to the oil barrier of the skin not forming how it's supposed to. Remember, we're talking about we want the fortress to be there. And the thing is that like when it's on the skin, okay, you see it and you get upset. Well, if it's happening on the inside sometimes and it's happening without that much symptomatology, we tend to ignore it in a lot of ways, not just in celiac disease, but in other conditions. And therefore, just so you know, these sorts of things can happen. And when that happens, when the essential fatty acids are not absorbed, the oil barrier on the skin can't form the matrix, the thing that protects you, against the outside world. So as I said, healing the interface, this part, the barrier, healing the intestine takes time, but it can heal itself. And so even after strict diagnosis and nutrient restoration and microbiome recovery, and all of these things, nutrient restoration, microbiome recovery, these are things that I spend a lot of time talking to my patients about, because once you heal those aspects of your gut, that makes you a robustly healthy person in so many remarkable ways. And it's also preventative of a whole host of problems, because remember, we spoke about how the immune system surrounds the gut. And it also, in a lesser way, surrounds the skin. And so when the gut is robustly healthy, your immune system is in really good shape, and it protects you against a whole host of other problems. Because when you have acute inflammation, it can reach the brain. And that can drive things like anxiety. The problem that sometimes happens is hypervigilance around food can cause a stress reaction, and that leads you into this fight or flight reaction. I had a teacher who used to teach me something, and he called it the false emergency state, which is where we react to something as if we're about to be attacked by a lion. And when that happens, if we were out in the savannah and a lion was chasing us, we would run away, and all that hormonal energy, all the energy that was released for when we became stressed gets expressed. But in modern life, we react to so many different things around us that our bodies don't have the capacity, they don't have the time or the natural reaction to expend that energy. And in a lot of families, and I learned this most a couple years ago when I had the chance to sit for hours with in a social setting with the families to realize the amount of stress that exists around food, and concern for the concern for your loved ones and such. But we also need to recognize that it's important to have an awareness of the level of stress that we have around food and about the worry, because that's not good either. And the magical thing about having an awareness of your level of stress is that once you have an awareness of it, it's almost as if you're a little bit of a distance from that stress. And when you see it, you in a lot of ways it leads you to be able to assess your stress level and in a lot of ways help it more so than when you're just sort of stuck in the stress. If that makes any sense. Additionally, in the nervous system, it can also cause itch. In other words, what something may not be all that itchy, but now it's even itchier than it would be. On top of that, in addition to the stress causing sleep disruption, there can also be various other things in the skin when you're itching that can prevent sleep disruption. So the nervous system, the immune system, the skin, the gut, all of these things are interacting. In other conditions, like lupus, as an example, there isn't necessarily anywhere you can turn the switch off. In celiac disease, we know, of course, what the switch is. And as I said when we were talking about it from the beginning, when the security guard at the company attacks the floor, once the gluten's gone, the floor repairs, and the security guard goes back to identifying intruders the way he was supposed to. And so we have this loop of the nervous system, of the brain, starting at the gut, leading to the brain, leading to the skin, and all of this going back and forth, and all of them sort of feeding upon each other. So when you treat celiac, as I said, when we identify, when the security guard is no longer seeing the gluten and the security guard's no longer confused, the entire connected loop starts to calm down, not just the intestine. And that's one of the most remarkable things about this particular condition. When I have a patient who comes in with lupus, as an example, or psoriasis, and they want to attack it from a diet and lifestyle perspective, there is no switch. We have to go through a whole host of gut healing problems, gut healing solutions, as well as diet and lifestyle. And of course, they also go on a gluten-free diet. They go on an additional diet, sometimes called a lectin-free diet, which is another gut irritant for some people that's found in things like beans and nightshade plants. And even then, going through all of those types of eliminations, which are difficult, it doesn't necessarily ensure that the whole condition is going to go away. So the practical takeaways from the things that I've been talking about tonight are to look at it beyond the digestive tract. Of course, the title of this lecture was talking more about the skin than anything else, but because of my interest in things beyond the skin, I hope you get to see sort of how these things interact with each other. The next is to monitor the skin. Use it as a window into inflammation. In some people, it is the indicator. It could be that you have symptoms of happening right now that maybe are very mild, that potentially could be related to celiac disease. I don't have to tell anyone here about hidden exposures. I think probably all of you are aware of it, but it is something that you need to be conscious of. And then finally, restoring nutrition and making sure that that you are at a point where you've learned what real nutrition is. You've learned about gut health. Again, so many resources available. And also, be aware that there are advanced testing. That's why I mentioned the Gut Zoomer, but the same company, Vibrant Health, also has a micronutrient test where they test all the different vitamins, and they also check essential fatty acids. I think it's called the micronutrient assay or something like that. Again, unfortunately not covered by insurance, but it can give you an indicator of how well you're absorbing things like all your B vitamins, your zinc, your iron, again, essential fatty acids, even your omega-3 level as well. It's a very, very good test. Again, it runs several $100s, but you should know that there are additional testing types of things that are out there for you to, as I said at the very beginning, really become your own authority about what's going on in your body that maybe your doctor might not be ordering or even necessarily aware of some of these tests. And then finally, to be aware of the stress and be aware of the anxieties that celiac disease can put not just on you, but on or if you have children with this, it's a whole family. It can be a whole family thing. And learn about stress. In essence, what I'm really getting at is something that everyone should be aware of. We should all be aware of our stress level, regardless of whether we have celiac disease. We should all be conscious of our gut health and of things that affect our gut. So I'm really making a call for you to become the most robustly healthy person as you possibly can, and truly to take the steps to really become, as I said, your own authority in health. Because the truth is that obviously living with celiac disease is not simply about strictly avoiding gluten. There are always going to be some doctor that you come across that's going to just say, you know, you just need to avoid gluten. It's not that simple. You also now know how interconnected so many things are. And what is hopeful is that when you have a deep understanding of these connections and you have a basic understanding of these systems and how to eat and how learning more about stress reduction and gut health, etc., you are more empowered to become, as I like to say, a robustly healthy person that is aware and empowered. And I guess that is probably a good place to end. So I'm open to any questions if anyone has any.
Perfect. Yeah, I've been recording questions for a little bit now, so we have, I believe, 8, unless any more come in. So the first one that we'll start with is someone said, I am strictly gluten-free for more than 20 years. Now I have been getting blisters on my tongue, which I have related to bananas and other foods related to latex. Yet my latex allergy seems mild. Can I get desensitized to this allergy?
That would be that's a difficult allergy. If it truly has been identified as a latex allergy, there are a lot of, as this person knows, a lot of different cross reactions, and that's best handled by an allergist. But that allergy is notoriously difficult for people, unfortunately. So generally it's an avoidance scenario in that particular case.
Okay. Would inhaling wheat, such as flour, while you are baking be harmful?
Yes, potentially. Yes, potentially.
Okay. I would like to know the link between histamine levels, DOA levels, and skin rashes or blood vessel symptoms related to high histamine levels.
Okay. Say the question fully again, and then I'll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It says, I would like to know how the link between histamine levels, DOA levels, and skin rashes or blood vessels symptoms are related to high histamine levels.
Okay, well, DOA is an enzyme that's related to the breakdown of histamine. It's not actually something that I routinely test unless I have somebody who has a histamine condition like chronic hives or chronic urticaria. But I quite frankly can't remember the last time I actually had to do that. But there are people that have issues with histamine breakdown. And DOA is something that actually can be used orally to help with that, and it can be correlated with certain types of rashes, mainly those things that are histamine related, like hives. I'll just give one little tip that I like to give patients with that particular condition is a vitamin called quercetin, which is a natural vitamin that can stabilize the histamine cell. Because what happens with these conditions is the histamine cell opens up, and that's what causes some of these itchy hive-like, generally hive-like reactions. And that can be a very, very difficult scenario to work with. But I'm not sure I totally answered her question, but hopefully there was something there that was valuable for her.
Yeah. This question, I'm probably gonna say this word wrong. It says, "What about using Xylem 9SP?"
Xylem 9. I'm not sure oh, is it, I'm not sure what that is. How did she spell
It's a
it?
little bit longer. It's Physcillium.
Say it again so I can look. I'm just going to type it so I can see it. Yeah. S C
Physcillum.
I L L U M. Oh, psyllium? Oh, psyllium husk? Like
There we go.
fiber? Is that what about using psyllium husk? Okay. It's a very good question. Um, and the answer is this. When someone has what's called dysbiosis, which is where the microbiome is not optimal, generally speaking, the way to help that is to actually avoid fiber for a period of time. So it depends on the scenario. If someone is not getting enough fiber in there, assuming their gut is healthy, or they're not having all kinds of symptoms, let's say, then psyllium husks can be helpful as a fiber supplement. If someone is already having a lot of gut issues, then psyllium is not necessarily recommended. Certainly, if they're already bloating, if they have symptoms like bloating, you don't necessarily want to introduce a lot of psyllium. The best way to create a microbiome that is diverse and healthy is to eat a wide variety of different plants, because the way your microbiome works is the more diverse it is, the healthier you are. And the way you feed the microbiome is by giving it lots of different things. And that's why sampling various different plants, different vegetables and fruits and things like that, that's going to lead to the healthiest microbiome. Now, if some people who have reasonably healthy guts just can't get enough fiber, then taking psyllium is okay. But if you have an inflamed gut, um, I'm not a big fan of loading it up with fiber until the gut is calmed down, essentially. So that's my answer for that.
Okay, perfect. Are there, oh wait, are there specific vitamins that you would suggest to a celiac patient?
I'll leave that up to your GI doctor to talk about. I have ideas about that, but I don't want to make any specific recommendations. But um, I'll leave that up to the GI doc for that. I think my goal is 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 to make sure your diet is healthy. But if you have an inflamed gut that hasn't healed, that it probably makes sense to take some vitamins. But I think the GI docs have specific recommendations there that I might not be fully aware of.
Okay. How common is dermatographic skin with celiac disease?
Okay, it's more common than the average population. In other words, I think you said dermographic skin. Is that what you said? Or yeah, it's more common than the regular population. But I wouldn't say it's like the most common reaction. It's not. There's other conditions that are more prevalent in the skin than having that.
How often should micronutrient testing be done?
It's one of those tests that is relatively new, and so there's no real recommendation. I and myself and for my family, I check it, once every year or every other year, just because I want to get an assessment of how well I'm absorbing nutrients. There's so many people out there who don't really realize um, that they're not absorbing the food, whether that is because of the food that they're eating or their gut health. There's lots of different things. And again, unfortunately, it's not a very common test. There are some that you can get at Quest and LabCorp, like zinc and magnesium. Um, and there are some vitamin B tests that you can finagle out of Quest or LabCorp that potentially could be covered. So I would, I would ask your doctor if you can get a micronutrient test. I can tell you that some of them will push back, and that's mainly because they're just not used to ordering it. And that's why, again, as I said, you really need to become your own authority in health. Um, I like the micronutrient test from Vibrant because it's so incredibly complete. But again, it can be very expensive.
Can stress cause chronic itching without hives or rash that occur at night? Celiac is
Yeah.
under control.
Yes, it can. 100% it can. Um, Stress makes everything worse, and if there's even, if there's a family history of asthma or allergy, or even just dry skin, believe it or not, dry skin in combination with a severe amount of stress can lead to itching. Because, believe it or not, when your skin is incredibly dry, I'm not saying hers is, but as an example, you can have dry skin, and sometimes you have these, when skin is dry, you can have these very small micro fractures in the skin, and that can actually lead to inflammation. And when you're under a lot of stress or you haven't had a lot of sleep, that inflammation that is what we call subclinical, like it's, in other words, your skin is not red and inflamed necessarily, but underneath the skin there is some inflammation. And when you are incredibly stressed and you're not sleeping the way you're supposed to, all of that can potentially get worse and lead to symptoms. In addition to the fact that when you are incredibly stressed, and I spoke about this sort of fight or flight scenario, that you can be in this chronic cortisol-induced stress reaction, that in and of itself primes the body just potentially just to be itchy and kick off this chronic itch scratch cycle that's possible. So yeah, it's quite possible. But the first thing I would do in those scenarios is actually, it sounds weird, but to one, make sure your sleep is optimized, and two, to moisturize your skin from head to toe twice a day, and make sure you're not using harsh soap, just like a Dove unscented soap, and just really moisturize twice a day, even if you don't think that you're all that dry.
Perfect. Are there lab tests that can help understand the level of inflammation in our bodies? And if so, what are they?
There are, and doctors routinely order them. One's called C-reactive protein or high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is an indicator of heart inflammation, but can also be an indicator of general inflammation in the body. There's ferritin, which is related to iron, but so in a lot of celiac patients, sometimes iron is very low, and as a result, the ferritin is low. But in some people, ferritin can be an indicator of, when it spikes, it can be an indicator of inflammation as well. And sometimes we get something called ESR, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which can also be somewhat of an indicator of something going on in the body. And in these advanced tests, like the gut zoomer, there are indicators in the gut that can be an indication of inflammation in the gut beyond what we're talking about here, that can lead to inflammation in the rest of the body. So yeah, there definitely are some tests.
So, okay. I have been diagnosed with celiac and DH. I have been on a gluten-free diet since my diagnosis in 2021. However, I cannot seem to get rid of DH. My former dermatologist gave up on me when I was worried about what Dapsin
Dapsone.
did
Uh-huh.
did to my red blood cells, and my new dermatologist has me on Roflas. Rof. Oh, I'm also gonna butcher this word.
Okay.
Yes, Rofluolast, which doesn't
Okay.
seem to be working. Do you have any advice?
Um, well, I would say first, Dapsone is very, very manageable. It's a very, very old medication, and so in a lot of ways, older medicines are more manageable because we know what to expect from them. Um, if you don't have if you don't have the enzyme that can help process that, then you can't be on Dapsone. But if you were on it, that means they checked it and you're probably okay. And in that case, I really wouldn't. Look, I'm speaking as a doctor who loves to avoid medicines as much as I possibly can. But sometimes you need them, and in this particular scenario, um, I would give Dapsone another try. It can really be. I don't know how much of an, I don't know exactly how long you gave it, but it is a very, very manageable medicine in the scheme of things. So that may not be the answer that you wanted, but that would be my recommendation.
Do you recommend all makeup, body washes, lotions, etc. be labeled as gluten-free for someone with celiac disease?
It's a tough one, and again, um, I don't generally know, not necessarily, but I do mention it. I guess that's maybe not the most precise answer, um, that's sort of how I go about it.
Okay. Um, how does quercetin help with histamine overload, and what all does it do to help?
The way it works is it stabilizes the mast cell, which means that the mast cell can't open as readily as it did before, and inside the mast cell is basically the histamine. So when even though you may have potentially more mast cells or not, the general problem is the opening of the mast cells, and so quercetin can stabilize the mast cell membrane so that the histamine is not released. That's basically how it works. If it works, it's something I recommend, but it doesn't work for everyone. But it's definitely quercetin helps so many other things. It helps zinc get into the cells, as an example. It's every year I'm just amazed at how many new things quercetin is good for. It was very popular during COVID because of the zinc thing. But anyway, that's the mast cell scenario.
Do you have a recommendation for a good moisturizer?
Um, I recommend so many. I mean, I'm a fan of CeraVe. Or, it has ceramides in it, which are what your skin naturally produces for moisturizing. And so I'm a big fan of anything that has a ceramide in it.
Okay. Um, DH flares once in a while. How long between accidental gluten ingestion and DH flare?
Everyone's different. Um, Celiac and DH are one of those things that are not, because there's so many other factors involved. It's really hard. It's really hard to say. It's a very good question. I don't know if there's an actual average. That would be a good thing to look up. I'm not really sure, but I can tell you that it's almost certainly variable among patients um, be, because of how the mechanism of the immune reaction happens. It's almost certainly variable, but there might be like an average that I just don't know the answer to. That would be an interesting thing to look into the literature on, which I'll probably do after. That's a good question, but it's almost
Um,
certainly variable.
okay. Um, there's a question that popped up on the
Yeah,
screen. I had missed that one.
yeah. So how to differentiate dyshydrotic eczema from DH? Well, dyshydrotic eczema is almost exclusively happening on the sides of the fingers, sometimes on the palms, and really could there be, and I've never had a scenario where those two were ever confused. Um, where, in other words, we had a case where I was treating it for dyshydrotic eczema and then somehow found out that it was DH. They both can have little tiny blisters, but the blisters of dyshydrotic eczema, we call them like tapioca-like. They're like a little bit deeper under the skin, whereas the blisters of DH are when they haven't been scratched are actually very clear blisters that I think hopefully your dermatologist would be able to pretty readily tell the difference between those two things.
So, okay. I like that show feature. I'm gonna keep using it.
Okay. Any autoimmune disease can so the question is Sjogren's and celiac disease comorbidities. Just about every autoimmune disease has been shown to have almost every has been shown to have not I wouldn't call it a comorbidity necessarily, but I would say that it there can be an association. I haven't seen any with Sjogren's, but if you look in the literature, you can find a case report of somebody having almost every single condition. But I wouldn't call it a comorbidity necessarily, but more of an immune associated potential association.
Okay. This one's a little bit longer, so I will read it. It says, my
Okay.
10-year-old daughter has been diagnosed with celiac disease for 2 years. She started having eczema inside her elbow a year ago, despite being on a gluten-free diet. Do you have any recommendations on how to manage this?
Okay. Um, it is possible that, first of all, as I mentioned earlier on, eczema and celiac are not directly related, but because of the way things are with the body, there can be like it can lead to inflammation. So she's been on a gluten-free diet, so generally that probably means that this is just not just this is eczema, and so there's a whole so handling the eczema is that's another lecture all unto itself. But as I spoke about before, managing the barrier of the skin is incredibly important. And for a child with eczema, even if it's just inside the elbow, you have to look at the skin as one organ because it is one organ, and that means that the more you repair the barrier of the skin from head to toe, the more likely it is that her skin will have the opportunity to heal. So moisturizing from head to toe with a ceramide moisturizer, um, and of course cleaning up her diet as much as you can. Of course, she's on a gluten-free diet, but also make sure that she's eating her vegetables and fruits and not eating poorly. Um, we sometimes put people on in addition to being wheat free and we sometimes avoid dairy, but I don't think you necessarily need to go that way. It's really a longer discussion, but I would just say that make sure she's getting moisturized, make sure that she's not using harsh soaps, make sure she's not scrubbing her skin in the shower, because when you scrub the skin, it takes off the natural oil barrier of the skin that we want to preserve, and which is not functioning properly in eczema. Because you can look at eczema two ways. One is from the outside, which is where you want to make sure that you're replenishing the external barrier of the skin, and then you can look at it internally to make sure that she's eating a very clean diet so that the immune system is not active. But the there's a lot more I could go into about eczema management, but I think it would take us a little bit it would take a little bit of time to go through all that. Hopefully, I gave some tips there that were helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Here's this one.
Ooh. Um, I don't really have any recommendations. That's something you should talk with your general doctor on. That's another another scenario altogether.
Yeah. Well, that is all the questions that we have in the chat. If there is any more, I will collect them and then be sure to share them with you and get answers to these people.
Okay.
But I know our time has come, so thank
Okay.
you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who attended. It seems like everyone really learned a lot. I know I learned a lot, so thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And yeah, thank you for having me. And just want to say, you guys have a really great organization, and for everyone listening, it's a great organization to support, and really does help families significantly. So proud to be able to contribute in a educational way.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Well, if you wouldn't mind, Dr. Carp, just sticking around for a few minutes
Sure.
after, and then we will let you go. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Well,
Good night,
thank you,
everyone.
everyone. We will